I don't drive at night anymore. At least I don't drive anywhere that isn't very well illuminated. I know that sounds silly. Trust me when I say that my friends tease me to no end about it. They're the types that love going for late-night cruises out around the outskirts of town and to go stargazing, both activities that I enjoyed too once. That was until that one night. After that, I couldn't bring myself out of the light ever again. It was about a year ago in late July. I was living in a small town at the time in northern Alberta, staying there to get the most out of the cheap community college and low rent. I had just finished my finals and was looking forward to visiting family out west for my week-long vacation. It wasn't exactly a short trip, a total of 4 hours at least just to even get to the next town over. To get to where my parents were was an additional 6 hours of travel. Driving through Alberta isn't exactly exciting either, not unless you enjoy wide open spaces and a lot of empty fields at least. It was about 4 when I got into my car. The bright idea to leave early that I had had the previous night was now leaving me bleary-eyed and full of regret. I headed over to the closest gas station and stocked up on the usual road trip supplies. Energy drinks, chips, pretty much anything that looked good at the time. The coffee I had brought with me was starting to kick in, and I began to look forward to at least the initial first few hours of the trip. That was typically how it was with long car rides for me. The first few hours were great and relaxing, with the rest of the trip just slowly getting worse as I got those fun cramps or stiffness in the body from sitting for so long. Before heading out of the city, I checked my phone, queuing up my playlist of music that would be keeping me company and double-checking my route out of the city on Google Maps. Damn. A red bar sat halfway between me and where I was heading, construction ahead. Expected delay 45 minutes. Great. That was just my luck that the main road itself was getting work done, but there wasn't anything I could really do about that. Finally pulling out of the gas station, I headed out, starting my long journey. The music pulsed through the speakers as the light pollution of the city slowly faded behind me and the night sky grew ever brighter. It was a full moon out tonight, and one that complemented a sea of stars quite nicely too. That helped raise my mood up a bit, and I soon got lost in thought as I cruised down that dark road. After about an hour of driving down the open highway, the sky seemed to quickly darken, the moon becoming obscured and the illuminated plains around me fading away to an inky black. The only thing that was visible now outside of my headlights were different twinkling lights off on the horizon and the city lights far behind still in my rearview mirror. The lights ahead pulsed between orange and reds with the occasional flash of a vehicle's headlights. That had to have been construction, I figured. It was another joy of driving out in these flat areas. You were able to see practically a full hour ahead of you in advance and just really take in all excitement. At night, without the moon's glow, it was a much different feeling than boring, though. It kind of felt like you were driving through space itself. A massive black expanse all around you with only the different bits of light off in the distance, showing any real signs of life, almost as though the night sky itself had dripped down and enveloped the ground below. I cursed and shielded my eyes as someone passed me with a set of far too bright to be legal headlights, night vision being lost immediately. By the time I could actually see again, thankfully having not flown off the road, everything that wasn't in my headlights was just pitch black now. The edges of my car's headlight beams didn't seem to extend very far out either. Because of this, I almost missed a pair of cars that were off the side of the road, hazard lights going on and off to try and warn me in advance. I slowed my vehicle to try and get a better look, in case they needed any help. But as I passed by, I didn't see anyone in the vehicles themselves. Neither car appeared to be damaged either. Weird. Maybe the owners had car problems and had hitched a ride back to town until a tow truck could come and retrieve the vehicles. I couldn't really give much better of a guess than that, so I continued on not wanting to rubneck any more than I already had. The darkness at this point had become rather oppressive. I noticed that outside of my beams of light was now just a solid black wall, like it just cut off immediately with no glow or anything. I had to slow my speed to half just to be safe. While trying my best to stay on the road, I must have completely forgotten about the construction zone, for when an orange pylon appeared out of the darkness, I hit the brakes. I must have missed the warning signs due to this weird blackout, But this had to have been the start of the construction zone. With due diligence, I crawled through the area trying to catch sight of any workers, or really any signs of life. That was when I realized that there should have been some kind of life around here. I had already seen their lights on further back down the road, but now, as I drove through, there wasn't a single piece of equipment that seemed to be turned on in any way. Excavators sat abandoned, doors wide open without an operator inside. Any floodlights had been knocked over or otherwise turned off in some other manner. However, things quickly went south from there. About halfway through was when I saw someone finally. A prone body lay face down on the side of the road, only half of the person visible from my car. I stopped the vehicle, wondering what he was doing at first, as it looked like he had his ear to the ground. Eventually I realized that he must have been unconscious, so I put the car in park, turning on my phone's flashlight and the car interior light before getting out to add as much extra light as I could to the area. The moment I stepped out of the car, I could feel a very stark difference in the air. It was supposed to be the middle of the summer, yet I could almost see my breath. It was freezing out here for some reason. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" I called out nervously, voice holding an odd echo to it that had no right to be there. I shined my flashlight over him as I got closer before quickly stumbling back. Jesus Christ! I practically sprinted back to my car, throwing myself inside and slamming the door behind me. Panicking to find the lock button, my fingers hit it, and I tried to stop myself from hyperventilating. The lower half of that man's body had been eaten. Past his stomach was nothing more than bits of gore and viscera that had been strewn out across the road. It looked like something had just ripped into him and left the rest to rot. I pulled out my phone and tried to call 911, but I had no bars. I must have been too far out to get any signal. It wasn't like I could do anything to help the poor man from here, so I pulled the car out of park and continued out of the construction site. I spotted a few more bodies in varying condition as I tried to make my way out. That was when I saw it. Just as I turned a corner, my headlights illuminated something that was hunched over another construction worker. It almost looked like a person, but it was far too dark. It was incredibly thin, spine jutting out from its back as it initially faced away. When it turned in response to the light, it covered its malformed face with a massive hand that ended in sharp, ragged claws, pinprick white eyes glaring at me from the shadows of its hand as it let out a shriek and bounded off into the darkness. At that point, I slammed my foot down on the gas and floored it out of there, having to swerve once or twice to avoid the abandoned equipment. Eventually, I rocketed out of the site, going far too fast, but unable to slow down. In my rearview mirror, I could see them, a collection of white eyes that trailed along behind me in the distance. They didn't make any sound, but I could tell they were getting closer little by little. I must have had at least some luck tonight, as when I made my way over the next hill, I could see off in the distance a gas station that was still lit up, a beacon of light in the sea of darkness that surrounded me. I managed to get to it in only a few minutes, my tires screeching across the pavement as I came to a halt directly under the gas area. The darkness was like a wall all around it, but I had a clear path to get inside of the building. Taking a deep breath, I escaped my vehicle and sprinted up to the glass door. When I got to it, the attendant inside was already unlocking it and pressing a button on the side to power it on, letting it open enough to get me in before he closed it again with the lock in place. "Are you all right?" he asked me as I stumbled away from the door, trying to put distance between me and the numerous windows that covered the front wall of the station. I felt vulnerable there in that little store, the panes of glass being the only thing between us and all that darkness outside just waiting for the lights to go out. I started to try and explain to him what I had seen when outside the bulbs began to blow one by one around the top of the gas station, with the darkness encroaching closer and closer until it was pressed up against the windows. The light that was inside didn't seem to faze it at all now. Almost as soon as it had reached the glass, I could see them again, small sets of white eyes dipping in and out of the darkness. "What the fuck is going on?" the attendant cried in a panic as he too backed away from the glass. That was when we saw the first crack appear on the window, the tip of a clawed hand pressing into the glass as it singed underneath the bits of light that reached. "I don't know, just help me barricade this," I shouted back to him before shoving the shelves towards the front of the store. The glass held long enough for us to get a sort of half-wall set up, but I knew it wouldn't hold them back forever. Turning to him, I asked, "Is there a security room or somewhere else we can go to hide in here?" He nodded, saying in the back room. "It's small but should fit us both." We got into the security room and shut the door, sliding the heavy lock into place before settling in. The room was small, but well illuminated. A row of 6 TV screens showing different camera angles from around the building. 4 of them were completely blacked out, with only 2 left that were inside the store itself. One was positioned in the main lobby and the second was pointed just outside our door. Only a few minutes after we had entered the security room did the front windows shatter. We only got to see a couple seconds, but we watched the shelves get pushed aside and the inside go completely black. Now all of the cameras were dark, and when the single bulb above us started to flicker, I turned on my phone's flashlight just in case. Luckily, the power didn't go out in this room, at least, the door being sealed along the bottom as well, so there wasn't any cracks for whatever this thing was to filter in through. We sat there in silence for a time, neither of us brave enough to break it in fear of attracting unwanted attention. That silence broke at the first sound of scratching, which eventually led to a chorus of low whispers just outside of our door. They sounded just like normal people, and if it wasn't for what I had already seen, I might have thought that we were being rescued. But their voices were too low, and underneath their pleas for us to come out, I could get that sense of danger just on the edges of it. Like if we didn't comply, there would be consequences. I don't know how long we were forced to sit there and listen to the scratching and whispers. The TV monitors would come on though, one by one, as the darkness seemed to recede, the sky a pool of red and orange that signaled sunrise. We waited until the sun was well above the horizon before opening the door slowly and taking our first steps outside. The store was trashed, glass everywhere, along with what looked like hundreds of footprints that had trampled across the merchandise. My car appeared untouched, and I got it running again after the police arrived to aid the attendant. I still don't know what I saw that night. I don't think I ever will. But I think that's for the best, as there are some things that should probably stay in their darkness. A week or so ago, I was driving down to Texas. It was a long drive, one that would take 2 days unless I drove nonstop throughout the night. However, I was eager to reach my destination, and I chose to tough it out for the sake of getting there sooner. The drive started out relatively normal. I drove for a couple of hours south and I felt good. I had my music cranked and a cooler full of energy drinks in the passenger seat. When I saw the sign saying "Now entering Tennessee," I thought I was making record time. I must have forgotten to watch the clock though, because the sun began to set. I was partially confused, mainly due to the fact that I had left earlier in the day, but I disregarded it as the idle distractions I'd created for myself to pass the time, faster being the cause. Something else odd I noticed was the open freeway. Normally I would expect to see many vehicles all traveling to different places, but instead I seemed to be the only one out and about. Still, I wasn't feeling tired and I had already committed to driving straight through the night, even if things seemed strange. But as I drove on, I realized that the sun had set far too quickly, and with the lack of vehicles on the road, it looked like I was driving in a void. The blackened world around me was only illuminated by my high beams, but I could only see perhaps 15 feet ahead of me. There were a few normalities like guardrails and mile markers, but if something were to appear in front of me, I'd likely hit it because of my lack of visibility. So I pulled over. My vehicle came to a subtle halt on the side of the freeway, and I turned on my emergency lights. Realistically, I knew it wasn't a fog. It was just darker than the world behind my eyelids. I suppose I wanted to see another car pass by before I concluded that something had gone wrong, but none came. I waited for more than 20 minutes and not one car or truck barreled down the freeway. I decided to roll my window down and allow some fresh air into my car. Plus, I was slightly panicking because I did have somewhere to be, and this was taking up precious time. Suddenly, the engine shut off. Even the accessory power had gone cold. I performed some percussive maintenance by smacking my hand against the dash, as if it would magically fix everything, but it obviously didn't. Then, I heard quiet ticking sound. You know, the sound your fingers make when you tap them against a table. It was like that, but instead of the soft, fleshy contact you'd get from the skin of your digits, it was more like the clicking of nails against plastic. My intuition told me it was coming from under the hood and therefore I'd have to step outside. But just as I was about to open the door, I almost had a heart attack because hanging over the trim of the windowsill was a hand. I freaked out and flung myself into the passenger seat on top of my cooler. The hand was tapping its pale white fingers against the inner part of my door, and after my initial fear died down, I thought that it may have been someone looking to help me. Foolish, I know, but I did have my four-ways on. A part of me knew full well that another vehicle hadn't pulled up behind mine while I was distracted by the engine malfunction, but I still inquired, "Hello? Who's there?" The finger stopped moving and the hand slipped down slowly over the side of the door out of sight. I waited while trying to catch my breath before asking again, "Hey, who's there? Why are you messing with me?" No sound, not even crickets, responded to me. I turned my head to peer out of the rear window and couldn't see anything, which made me wonder more as to who was outside of my car. My ear was pressed against the passenger window, and just as I was about to slide back into the driver's seat, I heard the tapping a second time right next to my ear. I nearly got whiplash from the speed at which I turned my head to look out of the window. There wasn't anything there in terms of a tapping hand. However, there were fingerprints left in the condensation on the outside of the glass. My heart raced and I crawled back into the driver's seat and tried to stupidly roll the window up, even though I quickly realized that was futile. Then I started to hear footsteps in the gravel on the side of the asphalt. But when I looked in my mirrors, I saw nothing. That was until my headlights came on without warning. They flashed brightly ahead of me and illuminated the figure of a human standing directly in the light. But I couldn't see who it was because they were missing their head. The headless torso held out its thumb as if it were hitchhiking. However, it only did so for a moment before beginning to approach my vehicle. I tried to start the engine, but for some reason my key wouldn't crank, and then I thought, if the headlights are on, then surely I should be able to at least roll the window up. It moved slowly, the body that is towards me with a shambling, unstable gait. Unfortunately for me, my window wouldn't go up, even when fiddling with the key in the ignition. I started to panic, and sweat began forming on the palms of my hand. By the time it was at the front corner of the driver's side, I decided I would get out and confront it. As I reached for the door handle and pulled, I found that it wouldn't open. I have one of those stupid pull-up locks that sink into the door, so I wasn't able to grip it and force it up. The electronic unlock didn't work either, so my only option was to climb out of the window. The problem was, it had already reached my side mirror. There was no way I would be able to crawl through the window without that thing grabbing me, so once again I slid into the passenger seat with my feet poised to kick if it tried to worm its unnatural way inside. From there I could see it was a masculine body that was exceedingly tall, and it wore a gray sweatshirt laden with holes. It had scuffed pants with tread marks denoting a tire had crossed over them at ludicrous speed. If I had to guess, I'd say they had been run over. As it tried to reach its arm inside, I kicked it away. It didn't appear to have much more than primal instinct because it stumbled back and took some time to regain itself. Still, regardless of the fact that it was a brainless walking corpse, I was still terrified. When it reached inside the second time, I scooted myself towards the driver's seat and forcibly jammed my foot against its chest, sending it falling to the ground. I used the opportunity to get out of the car via the open window and run around to the trunk. I couldn't open it without the key, which I had stupidly left inside, but at least I could get away. But as it rose to its feet, I felt an immense pressure in my head as if someone were squeezing my brain. My vision became blurry and different parts of my body burned with a fiery intensity. Every time I tried to move one of my limbs, I couldn't, and the paralysis weaving its way throughout my body made me an easy target. The headless torso continued shuffling its disjointed feet in my direction with an outstretched hand, but the other was held low with its thumb out. Suddenly, my faculties snapped back into my control, and I was able to avoid its mindless descent by stepping to the other side of my vehicle. I don't know what made me think the car would start if I tried again, but despite my former failures, I awkwardly jumped inside and turned the key. My eyes widened with joy when the engine turned over, followed by the familiar rumbling of the vehicle running. I threw the shifter into drive and slammed my foot on the gas without hesitation and sped off into the dark. I thought I was in the clear and my breathing slowly returned to normal. It was odd that some strange part of me thought that maybe it was just a ghost that was asking for help, but that was highly improbable, and now I know that wasn't the case. The freeway was still obscured by the all-encompassing darkness, but I didn't care. I just kept driving. Then my heart skipped a beat because standing on the side of the road was the headless person. I drove by, but couldn't see them in my rearview mirror due to the darkness. I took a breath and drove on without trying to think about it too much while taking a look at my clock to see what time it was. It read 00. Great, I said aloud, still maintaining a relatively high speed. My hands were firmly gripping the steering wheel, and I kept thinking it was over, but I was wrong again. Like before, I saw the body standing adjacent to the freeway with an outstretched thumb. It started walking into the road as if it were trying to be hit. I avoided it and continued on completely freaked out. I took a peek in my rearview mirror and I could have sworn it was sitting in my back seat, but as I quickly glanced over my shoulder, it was just an empty seat. My paranoia was somewhat satiated when I saw it again, but now it was holding something in the hand that didn't have its thumb out. As I drove by, I narrowed my eyes to see it closer. It was holding a smiling head. At this point, I was close to fainting from the fear. I just wanted this horror loop to end, but as that thought crossed my mind, I heard something heavy fall onto the roof of my car. I jumped in my seat, startled by the sound, and looked up. Obviously, I couldn't see anything, but I could hear movement, and I could hear movement, and I could sense the weight lurking above. Regrettably, during all the chaos, I had still forgotten to roll the window up, which I admit was entirely my fault, much to my dismay. I say that because the sound suddenly stopped and I thought it was over once again, but when I looked to my left, I was met face to face with the severed head. The body was on the roof, holding the head in my open window. I yelled, and it tossed the head inside, and it latched onto my thigh, biting deeply into my muscle. It laughed maniacally, and I nearly crashed trying to deal with both the head and keeping my vehicle on the road. I yelled out in pain and began pounding my fist against the back of the head. Luckily, one of my attacks dislodged it from my leg, and I grabbed onto it with my free hand before throwing it out of the window. All at once, the darkness lifted, and I was able to see the head bouncing down the freeway in my mirror, followed by the body it belonged to sliding off my roof, only to tumble on the road. I was breathing so hard I thought I might lose consciousness, and my leg was bleeding pretty badly, but I dared not stop. I started to see other vehicles, and that's when I finally allowed myself to feel any sort of relief. The events I had experienced shocked my system, and I decided I would pull off at the nearest town and get a motel for the rest of the night. When I found one, the lady at the counter said, "Your face is so pale. Are you okay?" I looked deeply into her eyes and said, "There was a man, or rather, a body on the freeway, without a head. It terrorized me and nearly killed me." She stared at me for a moment before bursting into laughter. "Oh, you young people. You always have the craziest stories, although I do seem to remember someone else saying something about a body on the freeway once." My eyes lit up. "What did they say? What happened to them?" "Well, nothing happened. We called the police, but they found no bodies, nor did they find any evidence of an accident. The person ended up leaving the next morning, and that was that." I uttered softly. I got a room for the night and addressed my wound. It wasn't as bad as I originally thought. It must have been the lighting that made it look worse. I stayed until around early morning and then checked out with barely any sleep Now I'm telling you to avoid driving down any freeway if you're going to Texas. I mean, I can't say for sure what the catalyst is, but something to do with my specific trip caused me to experience this horrific anomaly. And I just want to warn everyone I can. Although the lady at the counter did say someone else experienced something similar. I just don't know, and it's better to be safe than sorry. What's even worse is that when I was about to get into my car to continue my drive south, I noticed a fresh handprint pressed firmly against the outside of my driver's window. I guess I'll be sticking today driving from now on. I drove down Interstate 24 from the city I had spent most of the night in towards the city I lived in. It was roughly around 12:30. It was late enough that acknowledging the time only seemed to make me more tired. My tiredness was further compounded by the sea still coursing through my system. As reckless as driving under the influence is, at this point, being high was the only thing keeping me awake. On paper, the drive isn't that bad. It usually took me around 35 minutes or so to complete the drive without traffic. However, being the only car on the road seemed to make this particular drive endless. Interstate highways are interesting at night. When you are between cities, the road appears dark and desolate. When you do see the light of another car, whether brake lights in front of you or headlights behind you, its distance is relatively difficult to gauge, likely a result of how long and straight these roads can sometimes be. Even when you pass by a town, city, or truck stop, the lights never quite make it to the road. The only useful lights are the ones emanating from your car, projected forward in such a way that everything directly in front of you is bathed in a white haze, while everything to the sides of this light vanishes into the shadows. On a late-night drive down an interstate highway, darkness controls. The worst part of this drive was my paranoia. I had only recently started smoking weed again, so I was still often afflicted by a sort of maddening sense of paranoia that, at least for me, used to go away after prolonged smoking. I was worried a cop would stop me if I was speeding or going too slow. I was nervous I might lose focus on the road and damage my car or even hurt myself. And I was just generally paranoid of the isolation the dark drive was bestowing upon me. This paranoia was by no means debilitating, and I was still very capable of shaking it off as a goofy side effect of marijuana. But small changes in my surroundings would cause it to creep back up into my consciousness. Signs reflecting my car's headlights back to me, billboards, and even animals in the trees lining the road. I saw what appeared to be a deer that was considering crossing the highway. Since I didn't want to take my eyes off the road for long, especially as difficult as concentrating already was at this point, I merely caught a glimpse of eyes shining on the side of the road as I sped by before I whipped my head back forward. Now I was worried a deer was going to jump out in front of my car. I found myself wondering if the deer saw me. As I thought on it, it almost looked like we made eye contact with each other when I glanced towards it. I know that sounds silly and irrelevant, but that's where my mind was taking me. A paranoia to nonsense and back again. This was my state of mind when I noticed the headlights behind me. I thought it was weird that I hadn't noticed the lights before, but I assumed the car was further away than it appeared. Then the lights got bigger. The car was close. My heart started beating faster. I could feel my chest get tighter. How did I not notice this car before? Was it speeding and that's how it caught up to me? Was it a cop? My thoughts became more and more erratic. What if this car had been behind me and just turned on its lights? But why would someone do that? I took a breath. I grabbed the water bottle in my center console and took a drink. I calmed down. I was being ridiculous. Cop or not, I wasn't speeding. And I hadn't seen anyone on the interstate this entire drive, so the prospect of someone following me, as irrational as it sounds, was unlikely. It was just another car on the road, and I was getting far too distracted thinking about it and watching its lights get closer through my mirrors. I decided the best thing to do was to just look forward and concentrate. After all, I was almost home, and so tired. The bright lights of the car finally bounced onto my driver's side mirror and reflected back at me. Good, he's passing me, I thought. But although the lights had appeared quickly, as if the car they were coming from had been driving far faster than I was, the pace of the light's encroachment into my mirror had noticeably slowed. The reflected lights were beginning to hurt my eyes, so I broke my own rule and glanced back to see where the car was. It was in the lane to the left of me. Its front bumper was shockingly parallel to my back bumper. Even when I let off the gas slightly to encourage the car to move along, its bumper remained next to mine. I once again locked my gaze onto the road in front of me. I could see the light's reflection in my mirrors start to change. The car was speeding up. I resisted the urge to look over. If it was a cop, I didn't want to make eye contact with a tired, stoned look on my face. Even if it was just some random person, the thought of awkward eye contact with another driver, however brief, made me nervous. Plus, I needed to watch the road. Staring at the car earlier had caused me to swerve slightly. Without ever turning my head, through my peripheral vision, I became aware that the car was now driving right next to me and at the same speed I was driving. I started to panic. I knew it was still absurd for me to be so paranoid about this car, but I was paranoid and rationalizing the car's presence was not helping. I kept my face forward. I just wanted this car to pass me, so I could relax the tension in my body. After a few minutes of driving side by side with this car, I decided to give in to the urge to look. I looked over at the car next to me. I glanced for only a second, but it was enough time for me to definitively rule out the police. The car was black and did not possess anything visible on its outside that identified it as a police car. But just as I had feared might happen, I made eye contact with the driver. The driver looked like a normal guy. I don't really remember any distinguishable features, to be perfectly honest. 3 things did stand out to me, though. 1, he was wearing a suit, jacket, and tie and everything. I thought it was weird someone was still so dressed up even though it was so late. 2, he was completely bald from what I could tell. No facial hair or hair on his head. 3, his eyes seemed to shine as he looked at me. I didn't see any light in his car, but maybe his phone was in his lap or something. All of this sounds normal now that I'm typing it out. But at the time, his appearance gave me chills. The worst thing was his smile. From the second I turned to look at him to when I snapped my head back around to look at the road, he had a large, closed mouth grin stretched across his face. His smile wasn't inhuman or anything like that, like you might normally hear in a scary story like this. By itself in another context, it might have even been a pleasant smile. The man looked genuinely happy. With that realization, I turned my head back to the road and began to tremble. I didn't look back over for the next 5 minutes. I know because I kept staring at my car's clock to see how much longer I had to deal with this before I got home. The car stayed beside me the entire time. I began to get frustrated. Where the hell were the other cars? Where was anybody to convince me I was scared for no reason? I looked back over. The man was still staring at me. He couldn't have been looking at me this entire time while driving, but the intensity of his smile, laden stare gave me the impression he had. He started opening his mouth. Slowly. Never once breaking eye contact with me. I stared captivated by the sight. I was shaking. I assumed he could tell. His mouth opened so wide it looked painful. But I'll be damned if he didn't look just as happy as before, even with his mouth gaping open. I felt my eyes drawn to the inside of his mouth. It was so dark. I know the inside of everyone's mouth is dark when viewed without a light shining inside, but the inside of his mouth was so dark it appeared almost void. Like the inside of his mouth was so dark it appeared almost void. I felt trembles echo down my spine as I continued to shake. Tears began forming in my eyes. I just wanted to close them and look away, but I couldn't. I looked into his open mouth for what must have been several minutes. My car rattled as I hit one of the interstate's notorious potholes. The bump broke my concentration. I looked back at the road. I had drifted into the farthest right lane and was nearly on the shoulder of the highway. How did I not notice my car drifting? How did I not notice that the man's car had shifted right along with me? I consider myself lucky. I didn't drift right into the tree line. I quickly adjusted my car back into the lane completely. Stiffly, I turned my head back over to my driver's side window. The car was now 2 lanes to the left of me and had begun speeding off. I slowed down, but only kept slightly under the speed limit. I was sweating. I grabbed the water bottle next to me. Hands shaking, I put the bottle to my mouth and took a long drink. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were severely bloodshot. With how afraid I was shocked to remember just how high I still was. And tired. The tiredness nearly overpowered me, so I stopped thinking about the man, the car, and the void. Briefly forgetting about something, even something frightening, is strangely easy when intoxicated. I got home safe. I never passed another car on the road. I only remember just how scared I had gotten after I'd woken up and browsed the internet for a while. The weirdest thing about drug-induced paranoia is how powerful it feels at the moment and how ridiculous it feels after you come down. I wanted to believe I had hallucinated the entire event, that I somehow misinterpreted what I saw or misremembered it. But I saw a similar black vehicle a week later on another late-night drive back home. Except this time, it was a black truck. I only connected it to my prior experience when I noticed it was driving side by side with another truck in front of me. As I got closer, the black truck sped off. I passed the other truck and looked over nervously. The woman inside seemed agitated. I just kept driving and passed by her. I couldn't catch up to the black truck and never saw it again. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. In fact, I know I am, but I'm so scared to look at any cars driving next to me now. I don't know who I saw. I don't know what I saw. And no matter how hard I try to think about it, I don't know what that man was trying to do. My best guess has been that he was trying to play a prank on me, and maybe others as well. You don't have to believe me or take my advice. I wouldn't. But if you take even one thing away from my story, know that the urge to look at the driver of the car next to you is one worth suppressing. Even if someone is ignoring you, looking at you as well, or just playing a prank you could run off the road looking at them. And if they are looking back at you, how can you be sure they don't have some nefarious plan in mind? Maybe I should have just stayed where I was before driving and slept. Maybe I shouldn't have been driving while stoned. Maybe I shouldn't have looked. Maybes don't change what I saw. If you've ever felt that nervous tingle you get when a car is driving side by side with you, it's best to trust that feeling and look straight ahead. Get off on a different exit if you must. But please, listen to me, don't look at the person driving next to you.